the FBI and the ATF were not working partners. They were at odds with each other, and that even goes back not only to the Waco days, but even before that. It's well documented that they did not work together. And this is provable within the Oklahoma City case, too, that they were not working together. That may be the answer. I suspect there's more to it than that. I had a congressional staffer, that is a story, probably don't have enough time to get completely into it, but a staffer that told me that he had a high-ranking ATF official and a second person who described him as a Justice Department official that he talked to, that told him that, and these are the words he used, he said the genesis of the Oklahoma City bombing was right after Waco, the ATF trying to, intending and putting together a forced show sting operation so that they would look good like they were, doing the job of protecting the public from bad guys and bad people.
Trying to regain their reputation after the failure of Waco.
Exactly, and that's what he was communicating. And I had a lot of questions for him, and he said, "Look, I don't know about these other questions. I just know what these people said to me." And he had some other information, but it wasn't directly proving that particular point. It was just important information about the bombing, but it wasn't as quite as dynamic and damning information as the conversation that he was a part of with these other two people.
Well, there were comments made in the wake of this bombing that U.S. Representative Istook from Oklahoma said he had prior knowledge.
Yes.
Well, let me just tell that real quick, because that is one of the most, again, a damning piece of information. I went into the Oklahoma legislature with Ernest Istook. We're part of 6 members of the Republican Party that were elected in 1986. I know him. He went on to become a congressman. And as time went by, the bombing happens in 95, and the investigations go forth, the trials are going forth, and as we go into 1997, as I recall, if I'm remembering my timeline right, it was actually the fall before the Oklahoma State Fair was beginning. There were these 2 deputy reserve sheriffs that were good friends, and they worked together a lot on different assignments, and they worked the fair together. And so the news was constant in Oklahoma City about the bombing, almost constant, literally. And so they knew what we were doing, because our group I was in the news, and our organization was in the news. And one of them contacted me and wanted to talk. And I talked to him by phone, and he said he had information along with his partner that he didn't want to disclose at the time. He said, "Look, we're at the state fair, and we got to talking among ourselves about this Ernest Istook situation, and they decided they wanted to talk to us about it." Well, the story goes like this, is that the day of the bombing, after several hours into it, Congressman Istook shows up with a local, somewhat well-known attorney in Oklahoma City, and they walk up to the northwest perimeter, to the corner of the Murr building site. And as they walk up, these 2 deputy reserve sheriffs are standing there, and they had people all around the building cordon off the area to stop people from coming in and just, walking in the crime scene.
Sure.
And they stopped him, and they said, "Sir, stop, you can't go any further." And he said, "Well, I'm Congressman Istook, and this is Attorney Lana Tyree, and we just wanted to come and observe what's going on," or blah, 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 something like that. And they said, "Okay, well," and she had a camera, by the way, and they said, "Well, okay, but you can't take any pictures," and they said, "Okay." And so the two deputy reserve sheriffs were about 25 feet apart, actually. And so one of them began a conversation with Istook, while the attorney walked over with the other deputy reserve and kind of had a conversation with him, and she was wanting to take pictures, and this guy told her, he says, "Okay, well, I'll let you take pictures, just don't take any agents, because they don't want agents' pictures taken." And she said, "Okay, I'm with Congressman Istook," and blah, blah, blah. So they both are having separate conversations. And in the conversation, Istook says, as they're standing there shoulder to shoulder with one of these deputy reserve officers, they're both talking about how terrible a tragedy is and blah, blah, blah. And And then Istook says in that conversation, he goes, yeah, it's really terrible. He says, yeah, we knew this was going to happen about 10 days ago. We had a report, and I'm paraphrasing now, we had a report of some Middle Easterners that were radical Islamic types that were going to take action and blow up a building. And I'll never forget talking with this deputy reserve officer. His name is David Kokendorfer. He turned to him and he said, excuse me, sir? And he said, yeah, we knew about this 10 days before because of these radical Islamists, blah, blah, blah. Mm-hmm. And so in the meantime, the other deputy reserve agent, Don Hammonds, was talking to the attorney. It's about 25 or 30 feet away, separate. And she's taking pictures, and they were having the same kind of conversation. She said, yeah, Representative Istook said they knew about this about 10 days before, et cetera, and repeated essentially the same thing. And Don Hammond said, really? He said, excuse me? She goes, yeah, they knew about this, and blah, blah, blah. Well, these guys contact us. They want to talk about it, and we conducted a very professional interview because of what I referred to earlier, FBI agents and many others that counseled us and worked with us as investigators on this effort about how to conduct a proper interview. You don't lead witnesses. You don't suggest things to them. You let them tell their story and you shut up and be quiet, basically. And so I asked them, I said, what do you guys want? What do you expect us to do? What do you want from this after they told their story in a video and a audio affidavit that we then converted to also written affidavits that they were willing to sign? And they said, well, we think it needs to be made public. And so we told them, we said, okay, well, if you do that, you know there's going to be a lot of news agencies that are going to want to talk to you, and there's going to be a lot of interest in this. They said, yeah, but we just think it's important. We thought, they say to us, we thought that the federal government, the FBI, was going to conduct their investigation, eventually come out with this, and the fact that there's these other people, Middle Easterners, et cetera, but it's starting to look like to us, again, paraphrasing, that that's not what they're going to do. And so we want to tell this story. And so then it was determined by them, not by us. We didn't push them to have a press conference. They said they wanted to have a press conference. We had a press conference, a live press conference at the site of the bombing. And boy, do I remember that. It was a dynamic, major deal. Every news agency in the state of Oklahoma covered that live. KTOK Radio, which is the major news station in Oklahoma City, central Oklahoma, covered it live and covered it all the way into the evening. And it was, it was a very dynamic piece of information. These guys got a real wake-up call, not because of just what I told you, but after the fact of everything that I just told you, the story. After the fact. Then the FBI decides they would come in and do an interview. And there was one FBI agent who's real prominent in this case. His name is James Carlisle, that was told by us. I got to finally meet him, and he was a really kind of a arrogant and smart aleck, actually, to me and to a lot of people. But he was known for telling witnesses, some other witnesses, that he was going to write up his report about their story in a certain way that was different than what they told it. And he did this with David Kokendorfer in this. After they come to interview these guys, after they come out publicly and tell their story, even though it was known to the government. And David Kokendorfer, who was a Lutheran minister and missionary, told them the story. He says, the story as I just told it here on this radio interview. And so Carlisle stops and says to me, he says, well, I'm going to write down that, and again, I'm going to paraphrase for time, I'm going to write down that Congressman Istook said such and such, altered the statement significantly. And Kokendorfer said, no, that's not what he said. He said, et cetera, repeated again. He goes, well, I'm going to write down that the congressman said such and such a second time. And David Kokendorfer said, no, he didn't say that. He said such and such. And Carlisle looked at him and he goes, well, I'm going to write it down that way anyway. And so Kokendorfer approached us after that. He goes, you'll never believe this. And he was nervous. He was shaking because he was shocked by it.
Right.
He wrote a letter to the Justice Department protesting what had happened and explaining what had happened there.
Wow.
And so not just one example, many examples very similar to that, and evidence of prior knowledge.
I just Googled when the first World Trade Center bombing was, and that was in in 1993. So it would have been reasonable for people to be concerned that there were Middle Eastern individuals wandering around bombing our Murrah Federal Building. It would certainly have been reasonable for people to be afraid that might have been happening. And it disturbs me greatly that would have been an excuse that they used if it weren't true. That they would have stirred things up when it wasn't necessary to stir it up in that direction. Just like Susan Smith said that it was black men that hijacked her car and drove it into the lake and drowned her children when she was the one who did it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, here's a couple of comments about that I would make, Lisa. Now, people might be surprised that I'm not necessarily one that wants to say we got this big Muslim threat that we need to go get them or be fearful of them. That doesn't mean I don't recognize the threat from radical Islam. But
I think there is a threat from radical Islam, but in 1995, I don't think it was as great as it is right now.
No, but I'm going to make the point that in 1993, at the first World Trade Center bombing, when you research that, and this is public record in courts of law and public records, the FBI again had control over that sting operation that was supposed to take place, and the insider, the one that had infiltrated that radical Islamic group of people, was actually controlled by the FBI, and there is a very important part of that case in which that person, I forget his name, called his FBI handler and said, they're getting ready to make the bomb. Should I go ahead and proceed with putting this certain ingredient in that bomb to make it ineffective? And the FBI man said, no, do not do that according to plan. And then the rest is history. It went off and it caused all the damage that it did. They could have stopped that one also, but they chose not to carry out what was supposed to be the original plan so that the bomb couldn't be ignited. Go 2 years into the future, and when you look at what was going on in the political realm at that time, Clinton was, like so many presidents throughout modern history, was having negotiations about Middle East peace and conflict that continues to go on over there. And so when the bombing happened, one of the speculations by many is that a motivation for the government not to pursue the Middle Eastern aspect of this is it would really cause problems for those Middle Eastern peace talks, and it would demand, the American people would demand a response for those Middle Eastern countries or entities that were responsible for this bombing, just like there was in 9/11. And so why would they not go after Middle Easterners? Well, there's some real good reasons why they wouldn't want to do that. But you know, there's a lot of good evidences of not only prior knowledge but Middle Eastern involvement.
Well, we're going to take our final break, and when we come back, we're going to continue to talk to former Representative Charles Key concerning the Oklahoma City bombing. We hope you'll stay with us. This is the Deloach Approach on WNLN.
I was born in Austria, and I lived there 7 years under Hitler's brutal regime. And after World War II, 3 years under Soviet communist occupation. In 1938, the media reported that Hitler rolled into Austria with tanks and guns and took us over. Not true at all. The Austrian people elected Hitler by 98% of the vote by means of the ballot box. Now, you might ask, how could a Christian nation